Yes, I guess we are live right now. Sorry for the confusion. We were planning to make this conversation in another YouTube
I
link.
guess
We are
right now. Sorry for the
sorry
confusion.
for the confusion.
We're planning
We
to.
were planning to. Wait, my fault. My fault. This is the first time I'm live streaming, and obviously YouTube link was open at background. At least we know that it's working. Everyone can watch us. So let me very briefly summarize the problem, and then we can go ahead. And if you have friends, you can also direct them to the um, new link that we are actually covering this event. So it's about ISA postdoctoral. It's a ISA webinar about postdoctoral possibilities after graduation. We are lucky that we have really experienced speakers here as well with us. I will very brief. I will moderate this discussion, but I mean it will be a friendly chat actually among 5 of us, and hopefully everyone can benefit from this nice chat. I will very briefly introduce everyone, and then I will very briefly talk about the plan in our minds, what we're gonna talk one by one. Then we can start our conversation. I will start with Eliza Gheorghe. She's a postdoctoral fellow at Yale University, International Security Studies. And she is also starting at fall at Bilkent University, Turkey, and she will be my colleague at Bilkent University as well. And previously, she also held postdoctoral fellowships at Harvard University, Belfast, 2015 to 2017, at Cornell University, 2014, 2015. These positions were after the graduation from Oxford University, and before the graduation she held a pre-doc position, a type of position we can also talk later, at Johns Hopkins University between 2013 and 2014. Second guest, Evan Perkoski, from assistant professor at the University of Connecticut. Previously, he held a position at University of Denver Corbell School at 2016-2017 after the graduation from UPenn. And also, before the graduation, he held a, I guess, 2-year pre-doc position at Harvard University Belfast Center again at between 2014 and 2016. And our third guest is Kristy Belton, Director of Professional Development at International Studies Association. Previously, Kristy held a postdoctoral fellowship at University of Dayton at Human Rights Center after the graduation from University of Connecticut. And our fourth guest is Michael Flynn, Associate Professor at Kansas State University. Previously, Michael held a postdoctoral fellowship at University of Alabama between 2013 and 2014 after graduation from Binghamton University, SUNY. Actually, I'm also a Binghamton graduate. This is why our friendship with Michael really goes back in that sense. And finally, myself, I'm currently an outgoing ISA postdoctoral fellow. Last year, in 2017, I graduated from Binghamton University, Department of Political Science. And as I said at the very beginning, I will be joining International Relations Department at Bilkent University in Turkey. So here we are, quite experienced guests about postdoctoral positions, even predoctoral positions. This is why we would like to cover all topics we can have our minds in this 1 hour and 30 minutes session. Some of the positions I would like to hint you are search for postdoc positions. We come up with some subheadings. Search for postdoc positions, like, where to find postdoc positions, literally physically, I mean, which websites to use, I mean, and other things, when to find these positions, I mean, application process, post-application process, waiting the results, and if you get an offer, how to act. During the postdoc, what should you do? I mean, what should you expect to do during your postdoctoral fellowship time? And finally, I mean, after postdoc, let's say, because I mean, this is just a temporary position, these postdoctoral fellowships, most of the time only in 1 or 2 years, maybe in 3 years at most, you are again on the job market searching, looking for a job. We would like to talk about these parts as well. So that was me. Let's start having our this nice friendly conversation. Who would like to go first? Okay, let me start with a very brief question. Evan,
okay. Sure. So as you mentioned, I started out as a pre-doctoral fellow in the International Security program at the Belton Center at Harvard. So that wasn't actually a 2-year pre-doctoral fellowship for me. That was basically 1 year and a couple months of a pre-doc. And then I transitioned that into the rest of a postdoctoral fellowship. So while I was at Belton Center, I first initially applied in my 4th year of my PhD before my dissertation was done, when I had a pretty good idea of the trajectory, what I'd be doing, and what I would need to finish my dissertation. And most importantly, I think, when I would finish that dissertation. So I finished that roughly within a year after being at Belfer, then transitioned to a postdoc. And then I also went on the academic market that next year, but didn't get any opportunities. But I did get another postdoc, so I moved to Denver. And that's how I ended up having 2 postdocs, or kind of 1.5 postdocs, because I actually defended my dissertation in December of that 2nd year at Harvard. So do you want to let other people discuss theirs, and we'll come back and maybe talk about pre-docs after?
Yeah, why not? We can proceed with Eliza, if you want, Eliza. Or...
Sure. So I applied for the postdoc at Cornell when I was a pre-doc at Johns Hopkins. The process was a very quick one, very quick turnaround. They were the first ones to get it back to me. And I had to make a decision in February. So I said yes to them and withdrew my application from all the other postdocs I had applied for. I got a job in my 1st year as a postdoc and decided to decline it, which is not something I would advise a lot of people to do. And then I decided to stay as a postdoc for a few more years just to advance my research and to keep working on my project. So the postdocs I'm familiar with, they all have different deadlines, they have different answer dates, and overall, you know, they will be very different. They will attract different pools of people. So I'm happy to talk about those. But yeah, I guess right now I'm ending my 4th year as a postdoc at Yale. Efe?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Did you hear anything that I said?
Yeah, I heard everything. I was expecting someone to step automatically, but I mean, we can continue with Michael.
Sure. My story is not actually all that interesting. I was on the academic market for a year and I didn't hear anything. Maybe like 1 telephone interview in May or something like that. So I spent another year in grad school, went back on the market, and then I think it was again about in May when I got an email from Doug Gibler at the University of Alabama, basically saying, "Would you like a job?" And so I naturally said yes, I would like the job. And it was a very quick turnaround. There was a bit of negotiation, I think primarily over moving assistance. But I mean, it was very quick. I went from, I think, mid-May when I finally had kind of the signed offer in hand to getting married and defending the dissertation and moving kind of all in the scope of a month. So it was a real whirlwind.
Wow.
So it was a busy summer, but then I did a year. It was initially a 2-year postdoc. And I ended up doing a year at Alabama. I had a couple of interviews, and then ended up in that year, which was now my third year on the market. I was able to get a couple of interviews and a couple of job offers, and ultimately took the offer at Kansas State. And I've been here since 2014.
And thank you very much. And Kristy, your story, please.
My story, I don't know how much to tell, because it kind of touches upon some of the other areas of the agenda. But in a nutshell, I really wasn't applying for postdoctoral opportunities initially. I think it was my second to last year, or my first year of writing the dissertation. I said, I'm going to just start applying for jobs. And, you know, that's not necessarily the best strategy when you haven't even halfway through your dissertation. But I wanted to get a feel for what it was like, and I was not applying for postdocs at all. And I ended up applying for an assistant professor position at the University of Dayton. And what it morphed into was they gave their current postdoc at that time the assistant professor position, but they really liked me. And so they said, you know what, we have this opportunity available. Are you interested in it? And because it's within my area of research, it's human rights, I jumped all over it in that sense. So my actual acquisition of my fellowship is perhaps a different path. And I think this is important to point out to people who review this, that there are many paths to a postdoc. If an institution or even a particular researcher really likes what you're doing, it's not necessarily going to be an advertisement that you come across on a job board necessarily. There are different paths to it. So for people who are listening, it's a matter of not being frustrated, because, for instance, my own research is on statelessness. It's very niche. You're not going to find, well, now you'll find, as of this year, you'll find postdoctoral fellowships directed towards statelessness, but for the most part, it's not a very broad field. So just have hope in the sense there are different paths to getting these fellowships and aren't institutional.
I see. So thanks for this great introduction to the topic as well. Let me start with one very basic question, and I assume we would go ahead from that point. Where did you find these positions? I mean, we all had these positions, including me. I mean, where did we find them? Because many people on the job market, they know nothing. Most of the time, they do not get enough professional help in terms of where to check the job ads, if there are any alternative websites or places to check these ads and those kinds of stuff. Let me start with my experience. I was at the job market, and most of the time I was using this APSA's, American Political Science Association's e-job list. So basically, it's if you're an APSA member, you can log in and you can have these constantly updated positions. ISA has a very similar one too, right, Kristy? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So that was the thing, and there were two more websites, if I was not wrong, higher ed job, something like that, and one other, I don't remember. Maybe you could call it later. So basically, postdoctoral positions were placed at the same place with all other positions: assistant professor, associate professor, full professor positions. Do you have any? I mean, do you have other websites in your mind or any other mediums?
I personally relied, I think, exclusively on the APSA website. I think, kind of touching on a point Kristy made earlier, I was just, in my case, I was applying to kind of everything. So I was not looking exclusively for postdocs or assistant professor positions. Like you mentioned, I mean, everything was kind of pooled on APSA when you search for international relations. So I was just kind of blanketly applying. I mean, I think my second year I had over 100 applications out in total by the end of the year. And it was kind of a collection of postdocs and assistantships, but it was all through APSA for me personally.
If you don't mind, can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
So in addition to the announcements that are usually circulated by, let's say, the program administrators in various postdocs, we had the fantastic Susan Lynch at Belfer, who was really making sure to send us everything we needed. But the HNet, in particular, the HDiplo and the ISSS section of that, I found that to be overall very useful. They have job announcements, which include, of course, not just postdocs, but also professorships and the full range. So HNet, over time, I found it to be a very, very useful resource.
Does anybody have any experience with applying for postdocs with European institutions or from other parts of the globe? Or was everybody on here directed towards the US system?
I applied for European postdocs and I got an offer from EUI in Florence, which I declined, I guess it was last year. That was very similar to Kristy's experience in the sense that I was approached personally. So I was part of a project funded by the European Research Council, and I submitted a chapter, or actually an article to a special issue of a journal, and from that was the basis for the APRC. And later on, they wanted me to be there for 2-3 years, and I chose to go to Yale instead. So that was not necessarily something that I had seen and applied for. It was more based on the kind of academic and scholarly communities we are all parts of.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I also applied for a position at Oxford University. I guess it was a postdoctoral fellowship, and I remember that I founded that position. I guess it was not even available at APSA eJobs list. And I realized that there's this website. My European friends told me jobs.ac.uk, something like that, for European market announcements, actually. And then, I mean, I was constantly checking, not only for postdocs, for other positions as well, constantly checking some US sources and this jobs AC UK thing, and realized that most of the time they are not covering the same positions. I mean, you can find many positions at one and cannot find in the other. So in that sense, having these different sources and checking them constantly, all of them, I mean, especially if you are okay with positions overseas, it's a must, I guess. That's another website I can think of. If you don't have any additions, I mean, can you think of any, I mean, available list for new job market applicants that could check these postdoc positions? Because some of the postdoc positions we have in United States and probably in Europe too, these are permanent positions. But I mean, people get these positions for 1 year or 2 years. But let's say University of Denver, Cornell School, or Harvard Belfer Center, or Yale, they have this position available every year, every single year. So can you think of a list available online? For example, people can reach out and check which universities offer postdoc positions every single year.
Just basically, briefly to add my 2 cents to my experience, there's no one universal place to find these listings, unfortunately, at least that I found. I did the same as everyone else, checking APSA's eJobs, ISA, Chronicles, or no, Higher Education, one of those, one of their postings and websites. And there's another one particularly for international positions. I think it was called Global Jobs or something. I can't remember now, but I think if you Google it, you can probably find it. And for me, a lot of the stuff about postdocs really came down to institutional knowledge, that I would talk to my advisor, people in my department, grad students above me. And at Penn, I think the 3rd year I was there, all the graduate students started a list of postdocs they've applied to, websites where they had information. And that was really helpful because it's just really difficult to find this stuff and to know, as we're talking about, what's available. But I think reaching out to peers, and even Twitter and Facebook is good for this now. That on Facebook, I'm a member of a conflict research group people will post all the time about postdoc opportunities and jobs. And the same thing as Twitter. So if you just search maybe for postdocs as keyword search or hashtags or something, or look at scholars who post pretty frequently, they might be retweeting these things. And I found lots of articles and opportunities that way.
Well, I mean, actually, to tie on to what Evan's saying, most of us are part of some sort of at least one scholarly community, and we're on their listservs, and it's through those listservs within those communities that we get these emails. This is now available, whether it's a research project or a postdoc or some other position. So it's really important to get yourself networked into these communities as an initial step outside of constantly going back and forth to these job boards. And it makes me think too, we need they don't usually have alerts, right? That I'm aware of, like, this is my area of interest. Please send me an alert when a position comes up that is relevant to these keywords that I put in. That would be so useful for us when we're on the job market versus constantly, multiple times in a day, maybe going to these boards and looking, right? What's new? Yeah.
Correct. As far as I know, this is what people are doing manually. I remember a professor of mine sharing a file, a grant/fellowship file with me with more than 130 entries. It's really, I mean, it needs updating, of course. It belonged to, I mean, 3-4 years ago. But since we don't have this kind of a system for neither for fellowships nor for grants, it was like manually one by one. I mean, the common deadline for positions are this. It will be great, actually. It will be really nice. And another question I can think of, do we have these postdoc positions, I mean, most of the time available at the same time with professorship positions? I mean, because as far as I know, at least in my mind, the common thing is in the US job market, the postdocs are starting from beginning of December, right? Especially the established institutions and established postdoc positions. Even November, I guess. I mean, in the ISA case, for example, when I was applying, it was beginning of November, the deadline. At the time, of course, it was a year ago. So, I mean, do you have any idea about this? When does the postdoc market start and when does it end?
I mean, I could make a suggestion here as to what I've seen. And Efe, you're pretty much on target. I think the majority of them start coming out December and onwards. Heavy. I mean, most of the deadlines for these are in February and March. So that means the application, the calls come out maybe late November, but typically December onward. It's after we've gone through the first round of calls for the positions for assistant, associate, and so forth. So it's afterwards, generally.
I think that sounds right. My experience, like I said, I got the offer come May. I think the point about networking ties into this also because, you know, this is not a systematic assessment, but my impression is that postdocs are often tied to grant funding or something else, that people who are doing the hiring have quite a bit more flexibility over who and when to hire. And so I was really terrible at networking in grad school. But I think, you know, the more kind of tuned in you are and sort of the more that you take the opportunity to meet other scholars and, you know, folks who are more senior to you, I think that can really pay dividends when it comes to getting jobs like postdocs, because it doesn't follow the same exact kind of track that, say, a junior faculty position would follow. And my impression is it's not always the result of kind of a department-wide committee decision either. And so you know, the range of people that you might be dealing with can possibly be quite a bit smaller. Like I said, if somebody gets a grant, you know, I mean, you might have 1 or 2 people in charge of hiring for positions, you know, related to that grant. So I think, you know, I think these listservs, you know, just general networking opportunities, I wish I had done a better job of that. And that's something that I would echo, that this is really important.
Yeah. I guess when it comes to postdoc positions, this is the most important, one of the most important things, and I will come to this point in more detail, the networking part, the application process. And this is probably also because we have two types of postdocs I can conceptualize. One is more established positions versus more temporary positions, as Michael just said. I'm a associate professor. I get a grant, and I need a postdoc to work with me. Type of positions, and other positions are, as far as I know, in the case of, again, in Eliza's and sorry, and Evan's postdoc positions, or they are there every year. Belfer is opening up some postdoc positions, as far as I know, at least what I know. So, and another thing is, I guess, and we can come to this point, and then we can start discussing about the application process. Another typology for postdocs is there are more generalist postdocs and more specialist postdoc positions. I mean, let me tell you a funny story for myself. There was this position at Harvard University. It was not Belfer, but somewhere else, I guess. And in the position, it was saying that, I mean, they had this topic, and I thought that my research area could fit to the general call for postdoc. Then I applied for the postdoc. I guess 2 months later or so, I received an email saying that it was 2 years ago, I guess, 1.5 years ago. So it was saying that, thank you for your application. We are regretful to inform you. The classical email we always received, many times. But giving some numbers, how many applicants that postdoc have, I guess that had, it has 5 positions in total, and 1340 applicants or 1350 applicants. Over 1,000 applications, because it was a very broad area. Sociologists could apply, political scientists, economists, communication, and all other fields. Not even mentioning the subfields within each field. And there are more specialist positions as well. They are describing position in such a way that probably only, in my mind at least, probably only 10, 15 fit applications are done. Of course, people are applying all the positions, but so starting from this point, maybe it's good time to talk about the application process as well.
Efe, I'm going to interrupt you here for a second. To add to this typology of postdoctoral fellowship types, you have the teaching ones and you have the research ones. Sometimes you have the ones that are a combination. I think, given the current market, we're going to see a lot more of these teaching postdoctoral fellowships coming up. And it seems to me, and this is just based upon me looking around, it seems like European postdocs are often very research heavy, but in the American case, they seem to be slowly easing towards expecting teaching responsibilities as a fellow. And of course, this depends often on the institution, but that I think people should be aware that there could be different responsibilities. Of course, each postdoc has different responsibilities, but depending on geography, there could be different expectations of the kind of fellowship that you would have as well.
Yeah.
Just wanted to put that out there as another thing to consider in the types.
No. Great, because actually most of the times when we are talking about postdoctoral positions, we are coming up with the idea of postdoctoral fellowships, which are in our mind, which are directly associated with research. But right now, I'm recalling in my mind, probably I have applied for, I don't know, 10, 11 postdoctoral fellowship positions, and only 1 or 2 of them were not expecting any teaching responsibilities.
Right, I can vouch out. I looked just before this webinar, I looked back at, I had applied for 10 different fellowships over the course of 4 years, postdoc fellowships, and most of them required some kind of, you got to teach at least 1 course during your year with us. At the Human Rights Center at the University of Dayton, the expectation was that I publish, of course, but I had to teach 3 classes every year as well. So it was heavily teaching geared in that sense.
Yeah, so it's not I mean, we can say that then, I mean, it's not just a relaxation time or a free time to focus on your research, but either you have teaching responsibilities or you may have administrative responsibilities, or especially in these specialist postdocs, let's say, you are working for a professor as well, right? I mean, in my case, I was an ISA postdoc, and it was coming with administrative responsibilities. But you guys, do you have any research responsibility? I mean, working for another project that is not part of your research. Do you have this kind of an experience?
So the postdoc, if you don't mind me starting, the postdoc I got, the offer I got from EUI was going to be part of a bigger project, and I would have had to contribute a chapter at least to this big European Research Council project. But in all the other postdocs, all the other ones that I've had, they did not involve working for a particular professor or doing something jointly with another professor. It involved mentorship, which was fantastic, but it was not part of a specific grant that somebody wanted to hire a postdoc for.
Any other?
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit too. So I applied to a few postdocs that were tied to particular research projects or grants or centers they would want you to contribute to the project. I didn't get those, and I think the first choice anyway. And the one that stands out to me in that sense is at Princeton, and for the center, the Empirical Studies of Conflict, the ESOC Center, they hire 1 to 2 postdocs every year, and it's often a 1 to 2 year gig, it seems. And I think you're hired to help them out with certain projects and grants they have, and you have to dedicate maybe 10 hours per week or some amount of your time to their projects. And so those are different, and those you might get more experience out of them. You might also get a publication out of them. So I think there are some benefits to going that particular route. When I was at the Belfer Center, that was a totally generalist postdoc where there wasn't a niche you had to fill. It was kind of up to the people in charge who they want to select and what areas they were interested in. And I think to add to to make this typology a bit more complex, even some of the established and lesser established postdocs will change their focus from year to year. So the University of Denver at the C Center at the Corbell School, which has now had a postdoc for maybe 4 years or so, they will have a different hiring committee every year that will determine what they think their center needs or wants, basically. So the year I applied, they were interested in people who studied the dynamics of non-state organizations, both violent and nonviolent. The next year, it was civilian protection and civilian responses during state violence. And so it's not even just whether or not you're tied to a specific project, but sometimes they'll just say, we want people who study X, Y, and Z because we don't have that, or we see that as a growing interest in our department. And once again, that changes how you apply, how you structure your cover letter, your research statement, and everything else that goes with it.
I think in my case, kind of on paper, it was a specialty gig of sorts. I can't remember exactly where the funding came from, but I think it was some sort of internal money that Doug had been allotted by the university and essentially my responsibility was to help him locate other sources of funding, something that honestly I was completely unequipped to do when I went into the position. So I spent some time meeting with folks from around the university, learning that, there were certain funding sources that were off limits because they had, their own relationships with big sort of private donors. And then I was supposed to kind of take this, knowledge back and other research involved too, like just looking for different sorts of, government and private funding agencies outside of the US or the immediate area. And essentially helping IR faculty to identify sources for extramural funding and then putting applications together. I will also say that I was pretty lucky in that this was not directly tied to a project that anybody was working on, and they were very flexible. So I had no teaching responsibilities. I was on paper supposed to be doing 20 hours a week, I think, and then the remainder of the time, the balance was supposed to be some of my own research. But for probably the first 5 or 6 months that I was there, they basically let me do my own thing. And I was able to just conduct research, which was an amazing opportunity. And I think it helped make me more productive and better equipped for the next year on the market. After that, it was, essentially helping, as I mentioned before, helping them to put together grant applications for, I think, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and helping to match specific projects that they were hoping to start with funding sources. So that was, I don't remember what the application or the job call itself looked like, but it was kind of more of a sort of, half-time specialty gig, half-time just doing my own research.
Yeah, Kristy.
I was just going to say, I think those ones are really nice when there is a flexibility for you to conduct your research. Word of caution is, read the details, or if they don't provide much details in the application and the call, reach out to the people who are in charge and get more details about what your responsibilities will be, because as most of us had or currently have, these are short-term positions, and if you end up having a postdoc where you are expected to, out of your 40-hour work week, 20 hours are to administration, 20 hours are to your own research, that's wonderful. If you have teaching responsibilities as well as research, and you got to think you're going to be on the market again, right? And so the postdoc experience isn't necessarily you have all this time to do your own research. You learn a lot about time management during that period, especially if you're starting out with a family and life happens, right? So it's actually could be a very intense period. You come out of grad school and you're pretty much thrown into the fire in a sense if you haven't secured a permanent position.
Yeah, on that note, I would add that because of the sort of decentralized nature of my job in that position, there were definitely some people who I was expected to help who had very different expectations about how much work I should be doing for them. And so there, it was sort of the politics of the position were a little bit complicated, I think, by that. My immediate supervisor was one individual, and he was very accommodating and really tried to give me, he was a great mentor and he gave me space, but there were other individuals who that was not their priority. And so I think kind of having a sense of what your expectations are, maybe a little bit more concrete. I think that's very good advice.
And if I could add one thing to that too, it's that postdocs where you have to teach one course, that's not necessarily the worst thing for lots of new PhDs. From my own experience, I never taught my own course before my postdoc at the University of Denver. And there it wasn't required that I teach a course. So, the postdoc was great where I didn't have to do anything besides present basically at a seminar. But I chose to teach a class and make some extra money doing that. But for me, since it was the first class I taught, I learned a lot. And that was really helpful going into my first year as an assistant professor. And then I had figured out what policies I like, what stuff works, what readings work, what doesn't work, most importantly. So having that experience teaching during that postdoc year where you have a little bit more time than you do your first year as an assistant professor, I think can be a good thing if you've never done that before. So it's not something to totally disqualify postdoc from your list if it requires you to teach 1 or 2 courses.
In the meantime, I just had a chance to look at the questions we received. Maybe it will be nice to talk about the application process as well. Then we can go into the details of what to expect from a postdoc. I mean, how to arrange your time during the postdoc. So let's take a step back. For example, we have this question from Niraj, if I'm pronouncing wrongly, sorry. She or he has a specific question about the application documents. So most of the time, especially in United States, which documents they ask for an application, which documents do we submit? I mean, as far as I can come up with, it's the cover letter. Most of the time, they either ask for a research statement or research proposal, and sometimes both. If they ask you to specify a specific project you're gonna work on. And all these documents are most of the time, aside from the research proposal, because if they ask for research proposal, they have clear instructions. But all those documents should not exceed most of the time 2-3 pages, right? Cover letter, research statement. I mean, they also ask you to submit your CV. Can you come up with other documents I cannot think of right now?
They usually, if you don't mind me starting, they usually ask for a writing sample as well.
Yeah.
Chapters of the dissertation or articles. I have yet to apply to a fellowship or to a postdoc where that was not required. So that's usually a good thing to have ready at this point.
And for the writing sample, Eliza, do you think if let's assume and hope that you have more than one writing samples you can submit? I mean, for example, when you were submitting, would you go with the best one in your mind or the fittest one in terms of the position?
I go with the chapters that were published as articles.
So from your dissertation, if possible,
Right.
published articles of the dissertation. Do you guys have any idea or suggestion?
So when I applied for postdocs, I never sent an article, as I was never even close to having an article based on dissertation done yet. So I always sent a chapter. And I think the chapters I sent typically were my theory chapter, where I kind of maybe added on to it part of the introduction, just to give the reader a sense of what my dissertation broadly is doing, and then the theoretical argument, which is kind of the meat of what, the novelty of your research. And then depending on the place or what I want to showcase, sometimes I would send a quantitative chapter if I knew that they were more quantitative oriented, or if I want to show mixed methods, I would send both a quant and qual chapter. But it really depends on if it's a generalist postdoc, if they are looking for something or some interest to fill or some niche, kind of definitely what's most polished. I think that's what you want to focus on. But for me, I had success without submitting an article, but if you have one, I mean, that would be great because it's so much more concise and can sell your argument more effectively.
Do you have another related question? These are also the questions, I mean, I had in my mind only 1-2 years ago. And honestly, since I always got, I mean, different answers, it's good to talk about these as well, because these are very practical advice we could offer everyone. So, do you think postdoc should be at one step forward from your dissertation? I mean, should it be like, I mean, should it build in your research proposal, research statement as well? Should it build on your dissertation topic, or would it be okay to come up with a new research idea and a new research proposal? Do you have any preference, or do you have any suggestions? Probably you heard from many different friends and, I mean, colleagues.
Personally, sorry, Kristy, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
I would do all those things. So I think when you're applying to a postdoc or for a pre, I did both actually, but in all those cases, the main focus should be your dissertation and what you're doing, how you're analyzing it, what your theoretical contribution is, how it fits in. I think the policy implication is going to, whether or not you play up the policy implications will depend on you apply to a place like Belfer at the Kennedy School. They care a lot about the policy real world impacts. You might want to play up that angle. But I think the dissertation should represent about half of your research statement. Then I think the rest of it should be projects you're also working on. But I think it's really great to say, also in the next year, I want to start this new project that looks at X, Y, and Z. Here's how I'm going to do it. Don't be superficial, because I think people underestimate the ability for readers to see through some of these vague statements we throw in, like that you're new when you're really not even close to it. Or for me personally, I remember my first year in the market trying to sell myself as someone who studies international institutions. And that's just not true. And people will try to shoehorn these things to make them seem like a better fit, but you can always see through that stuff. So be realistic and be structured, but don't overreach.
And I would add that idea being is also be real in the sense of true to yourself. I know we all feel as if we have to we have to keep our lifeline within academia, right? And so we got to get these postdocs, we got to make our writing sample, for instance. My answer to that previous question would be the best fit. Not necessarily the most put together, the one that's being published. I had the good fortune to be able to choose among publications at the point where I was on the market. But for me, it was always a matter of fit, because there's going to be so many people who are applying for these positions, even use their language from their actual call for applications. Take certain phrases that they use and put that within your cover letter. Put it within your research statement. And I agree with Evan, it's important to not play up, but emphasize your own strong research agenda, which is encapsulated within your dissertation, but also to show that you've given thought beyond your dissertation. Because, goal is convert your dissertation into a book. Reality is you may or may not have success in doing that, but even if you don't, you are still a scholar and an expert who has interest in these maybe 1, 2, 3 other areas that you will include in a research agenda. And you can show people that you've accomplished through your dissertation answering certain questions, but that you as a scholar are much broader than that. I think even in these specialist positions, they want your work. They are to hire you in whatever capacity, as an assistant professor, as a postdoc. They want to know at the end of the day, you are a specialist, but you are also broader than that. So if they need you to teach a certain course or engage in research on a given project, you would be their person. So don't focus solely on what you've done, but what you could also do.
And for the to continue with the application documents, since we already start mentioning about the research proposal and the details, so we know that, of course, CV is a very individualized, personal thing, cover letter as well. But for these, including cover letter actually and the research statement, do you think, do you suggest any specific paragraphs, or for example, research statement, let's say? Of course, we don't need to go into the details, but should it be like, I do this, I'm doing this, I will do this, or should it somehow connect to the, let's say, aim and scope of the fellowship you are applying? Which approach would be best in that sense?
So I'll jump in here again. At least the way I've always done it, when I was on the market, I only applied for positions where I felt that I would actually want to be there at the end of the day. I was one of those strange birds, and this is why I don't have a position, perhaps in academia, that I didn't feel the urgency to have to remain within academia. I can be a scholar outside of it. So for me, it was important to see what was a fit. I wasn't about to apply to something, and if I got an interview, I wouldn't be happy in that position, even though it kept me in academia another year or two, right? So I would always apply to these positions that I knew I wanted to be there. Were there times where I applied to positions because it was just general IR? Sure, yes. My heart wouldn't have been in it. It wasn't human rights related, but I could have done it, right? But for me, again, going back to, you have to make yourself stand out, but you have to connect as well. It's one thing to say, I've done these wonderful things and I've published this, that, and the other. Great. There's probably 70 other people who've applied for this, at least, who can claim these same sorts of things, right? Connect to them. They want to see that you have actually read their mission, understand where they plan to go in the next 3 to 5 years, and how you fit in with that. If you can't demonstrate that within your cover letter, you're just another Joe and Jane to them.
Yes. So let me open the Pandora's box then. The most important thing, networking. whether networking can overrule everything or not. So related to this, I mean, in our research statements as well, the Niraj asked this question, whether we should identify faculty whose work overlaps with your interest or who you would like to work with. I mean, adding up this question, let's say you are applying for a postdoc position, and it's not a very generalist position offered by an institution, so even finding a specific contact person is hard, but a more specialist position, like, I mean, obviously you're gonna work thanks to a grant or something like that. Prior to application, should you contact with the PI, let's say, the person who actually opens up this postdoc position, and whether you should specifically mention those names in your application process?
I have some thoughts on this, and so I'm happy to jump in first. So if you're applying for a postdoc that's tied to a specific person or a couple people, or you know someone on the search committee, and here definitely the search committee dynamics do matter a lot, because as we mentioned a couple times, postdocs are a lot lower stakes than an assistant professor. So you often have a group of 2 to 3 people making the decision, and that decision doesn't necessarily go to an entire departmental vote. So those people on the committee do matter a lot, especially if it's tied to a particular grant. I think if you could meet the person at a conference, that's really helpful, but I don't know how much emailing the person and just saying, hey, I'm going to apply, I'm really interested in it, will help, because I'm sure lots of people are doing that and it won't help you stand out in any way. If you stand out through an email and you say, I have this paper, or I have something, or you have a question, then that's totally fine. But I don't think there's any benefit necessarily to just reaching out and letting the person know you're applying. I think having a strong cover letter, and really that first page of the cover letter is so critical to all these things, because if you're not sold on a person by that first page, you might not even get to the second page. So stating, showing that, like Kristy said, that you understand what this operation is trying to do, what the grant's trying to do, why you're a good fit, using their keywords, do that in the first 2 paragraphs before you get into your dissertation stuff. But once again, so in terms of reaching out and getting away from it here, I think if there's a real reason why you should be reaching out, or something can make you stand out, then sure, meeting the person in person is probably better, but just a general email probably won't do too much, at least from my perspective.
I think that makes sense. I would also sort of add that I think that there are benefits to tailoring, but so I was on the market for 3 years. For your own personal sanity, I would also say, don't kind of drive yourself crazy, sort of trying to micromanage the process, right? And eke out every sort of marginal gain that you think you can eke out. Having been through a couple of rounds of hiring on the other side of the table now, the language that you find in some of these ads, this might be more true of assistant professorships and postdocs, given the points that we've raised about sort of how the hiring processes are governed, but sometimes these are ads put together by committee, and sometimes the best candidate might not necessarily be the one who I don't know, looks on paper like they are the closest match to the issue area. I mean, there might be something else, like a methodological skill that somebody possesses that is really attractive to the hiring committee. So I do think that you should, if it makes sense to ask a question, yeah, I agree that I'm not sure just emailing for the sake of it gives you any substantial gain. And just, know for your own sake that there's really only so much that you can do. And these are not, for lack of a better term, always rational processes. So I've applied to, to jobs before that, really sort of build up kind of a U.S. foreign policy angle, and that's a lot of what I do. But there could be a million reasons why I don't hear back from from those positions. So I just try to balance, right? Sort of at the end of the day, you just kind of have to let it go and understand that there are certain things that are out of your control. Because I know this can be an extraordinarily stressful process, especially when I mean, it took me a year, I think, to get a rejection letter from one place. So not that I was holding out hope, 11 months later, but.
Add to that, sometimes you don't even get the rejection letter at all, right? You just know the ongoing silence means you were not considered. So the fact that you even got one was a matter of high civility.
Yeah. Thanks to this naming and shaming very recently, especially on Twitter and other places. I mean, I can say that compared to previous years, the departments or the institutions are more frequently sending the rejection letters. But I mean, still it can take some time. But I have a personal question to you about your experience, about your postdoc experience, Michael. So you said that it was a position related to the grant. I mean, thanks to this grant. So basically, I mean, you explained a bit at the very beginning of our chat, but was that the case that you knew someone from there, so had a contact prior to the application, or they contacted with you, or was that just, I mean, you seen the job ad, just submitted every document you have, you don't know anyone there, they didn't know you, but then you were a good fit for them and they selected you, or something else?
So I had never met Doug before. Ellen Coutrone, who was another Binghamton PhD, was there as an assistant professor, and I worked with her a bit. We shared an advisor. So I don't think she had anything to do with the hiring process, but I'm sure having someone there who can, assure the people who are hiring that you are a tolerable colleague, I think goes a long way. I think somebody mentioned earlier, right? I mean, people are kind of going in blind, right? You don't necessarily always know the people that you're ultimately looking at hiring. And I mean, I know my advisors knew Doug and had met him previously, but I had no contact with him, and I don't think he had contacted any of them before sending me the email. So I think in a process where you're looking to just acquire as much information as possible about the people who you're looking to hire, I think, going back to this idea, I think networking is really important. I don't think it's always going to be necessarily a decisive factor, but I think it certainly matters in terms of, and again, I think as Evan pointed out, right, it's sort of it's lower cost for a postdoc because you're not necessarily looking at keeping them for several years and potentially giving them tenure. So if they are a very bad fit, you can let them go. But I still think you want somebody who's reliable, and so I think networks matter, right? Because it's that much more information that you as the person hiring are investing your time and money into this person. So I think it certainly helps to know people who know people.
Do you guys have any other suggestions, recommendations about the application process? Do's, do nots?
Yes, really basic one here. Spell check. And if you have the time, actually read over your cover letter, which you'll probably use as a template for your other 50 applications that you do, because we are so used to how we write that we miss our own inconsistencies and inaccuracies. And so write something up, leave it alone for a time if you can, then read it again before you start using it as your basic template to send out to everybody. Because, especially if you're going at it year after year for 3 or 4 years in a row, make sure you've changed your 2014 to 2015, basic things like that. That's a big do, right? Recheck yourself.
I would add that too, not just to give yourself time before you reread it, but let other people read your cover letter and comment on it. I hated doing that because it's very much a personal thing that you're selling yourself, and it really is describing you and your research. And when someone tells you that they don't like how something sounds or they suggest rephrasing it, it's difficult to not take that personally sometimes. But definitely, I think the year I was in the job market, I probably had about a dozen people read my cover letter and comment on it. Because as Kristy said, you just don't recognize some of your own proclivities in writing and things that maybe make sense in your head, but don't make sense to other people. So let many people read it if possible.
So I love that idea. I never had anybody read my cover letter. So I'm just curious among us here. Did you all also have people read your cover letters or your entire applications? Yes?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
I did, yeah.
Oh.
My wife read and sat through so many iterations of my job market materials. And it was a big help. I think that's absolutely good advice.
Yeah, definitely. Might be right. I'm not going to make jokes. I'll be quiet right now. Sorry.
One related question to what just Evan said. So recently, I have read a cover letter. It was a friend from history department. And the format and other things of the cover letter were exactly the same, but it was more like a story. In our cover letters, mostly in political science and in United States, since we have many international, we may have international audience as well. It will be nice to highlight this as well. How personalized a cover letter should be. Because as far as I see, when I compare this history department cover letter with political science department cover letters, not only mine, but many other cover letters as well in political science, ours is very mechanical. No feelings, no emotions, nothing. It's just, I did this, I'm doing this, I'm gonna do this, I'm the best about this, and you should definitely hire me. But in the history department, it was more like, this is my life, this is my story, this is how I suffered, and now I'm rising again. So especially for US job postdoctoral market, let's say, how personalized a cover letter should be? Do you have any suggestions?
Do you mind if I jump in? I'm the no emotions, no feelings kind of person. So I also read a lot of materials from my friends who are in history, and what you found there is exactly what I find in their materials as well. There's much more of a story. Some people go back and talk about their parents, how their parents' sort of situation shaped them. I wouldn't be honest if I say that's just not my style. So I think in many ways, when you're writing for a history department, it makes sense to write a story because this is basically what history departments do. So I would imagine that the kind of more technical type of writing that we have in political science, I think that's more suitable.
I'd be curious to hear everybody else's thoughts on this, but I think process, like thinking about the process matters. The first stop on every job committee that I've been on since grad school has been the CV. And so I think if you put the letter in that context, I would agree that, oftentimes you're first looking at the CV to sort of get a rough sense of who this person is, right? This is kind of your profile. The letter should add a little bit more context to that. And then maybe, for research specific context, you have the research statement, the teaching statement, right? These other kind of accompanying documents. Yeah, I agree. I'm not necessarily looking for a lot of kind of personal information. I think typically people go to the letter to look for that sort of next level, contextual information about who you are in terms of your work and where you see your work going. I don't know if there's any benefit, right, to sort of adding a lot of, I don't want to say no personal detail, right, but sort of that model, right, from the sounds of things, I don't think is maybe all that useful in terms of poli-sci.
Yeah, I would agree. And just because I brought it up and I was the one who mentioned it being personal, to clarify, I didn't mean it in the touchy-feely way of emotions. I mean personal in that it reflective of you is something you spent a lot of time on and have, I'm sure, done many drafts of, and to share that with someone else is difficult and can be hard to take that criticism. But I also can imagine, and I've seen friends with cover letters where they have a couple sentences saying, my research is on migration and refugee flows and experiences in my past, what my parents did, maybe motivated me to study this. And so you can imagine ways to work in some of your past and your experiences, and maybe what got you motivated to study a particular issue as a way of selling how really you're motivated to keep working on this. And I can bet that anything more than like 2 sentences, I can't imagine that working. So overall, yeah, definitely not as personal as history, because I think what we were just saying is correct about cover letter is really trying to show both who you are now and where you're going and encapsulate your entire story, but not necessarily the personal story.
I see. So great suggestions again. Not only for new applicants, I guess we can all use these suggestions for our upcoming careers as well. So if there's no addition to this application process subheading, let's say, for the last part of our conversation, I would like to talk about. I would like to discuss what to expect from a postdoc, because after all, we know that it's a temporary position most of the time, especially in the United States. It's at most 2-year positions. Most of the time, it's only 1-year position, and it means that, I mean, considering that the job market opens at the beginning of September, almost the day you set up your new office at the postdoc, you need to start writing new letters for the deadlines, upcoming deadlines in 10-15 days. So let's talk about this context. But I would like to start with Eliza, because at the very beginning of our conversation, she said that she got an offer, a tenure track offer from somewhere, I don't remember right now, and she picked a postdoc, and she said, I would never do that again. So, I mean, let's make the transition over there. I mean, what is a postdoc? What's a tenure track job? And why, or should tenure track jobs must be preferred over postdocs, or the story is different? Why did you say so? I mean.
Well, if the choices I would make, if those choices would take me to Belton, I would make them all over again, because I'm very happy about going to Belton. So I sort of, the reason why I said that when I got that offer, it was an offer in Germany at the University of Hamburg. I gave it up, and then for a while, being back on the job market and submitting applications all the time, everybody knows it's a very stressful process, and the uncertainty that comes with that is sometimes difficult to bear, and can make just sort of the usual research process and our daily activities, it can slow us down. So when we're postdocs, the one thing we have freedom maybe more than when we are professors, but we don't have any clue about what's going to happen. So that's why I guess I was saying that maybe that decision was something that later on I thought again about and realized maybe it should have been different. But as a postdoc, just the amount of research and the amount of support that one can receive from and getting to know a variety of contexts and a variety of institutions, that's a very enriching experience. So it's something that I would encourage people to think about and to try to apply for. And if they're lucky and they get a job right out of grad school, going away for a year on sabbatical as a junior faculty would be also a very enriching experience, I would imagine.
And the same question for everyone. What do you think? What to expect from a postdoc, and what one should not expect from a postdoc?
I can start with my experiences, because I had different types of postdocs. So just counting the pre-doc, I was at the Belfer Center for a postdoc, and then for about half a year, and then at the University of Denver at the Corbell School. And at Belfer, it's the model is similar maybe to CSAC at Stanford and maybe Dickey at Dartmouth, where there are somewhat larger programs where you have lots of postdocs around. So at Belfer, there might have been 20 to 25 postdocs there, and counting pre-docs as well, and people who weren't necessarily around all the time. But you have this great community of people who have similar interests, who are starting out in their careers. So it's a great environment to meet people and to start new collaborations. I think personally I've met a lot of my good friends now in political science and in IR I met when I was at Belfer. And I probably started about 3 or so different research projects with my colleagues when I was there. So that was great. But there definitely is a benefit to being in a smaller program too. And so when I was at the C Center, I was one of 2 postdocs with a much smaller department, and I was really integrated into the department. I went to faculty meetings. I went to all their talks and got to know every faculty member, whereas Belfer, there were only 2 faculty, and your offices are kind of away from everyone else in this kind of postdoc annex above Chipotle, which wasn't a bad thing, but you're very much separate from the rest of the department. And so really, it really quite varies. And that was nice because I got to know lots of tenure track faculty and tenured faculty. I got really great feedback on my projects because there's so much of that community. But I didn't have the young people around me like I had at Belfer. But I think overall these postdoc years, and a way to avoid this postdoc trap, which I think I might be jumping the gun about, but you should just use it as time to get more research out, right? To make yourself better for next year, to prepare yourself. And it shouldn't be approached as a year where you can kind of relax, but it should be a year where you get stuff done, you improve yourself. Because if people don't see that improvement on paper, well, then they're less likely to hire you in the future, because it says, well, what have you been doing these last 2 years when you've been on a postdoc and not teaching? What will you be doing while you are teaching? Will you get anything out once that comes? But definitely use it to your advantage, and there are lots of non-tangible benefits like meeting people and stuff too.
I would say, if I can jump in next, I guess. Like I said, I was very lucky that I didn't really have to teach, and I was working with people who were, I think, very cognizant of the position that I was in, and my need to, essentially, as somebody mentioned earlier, just hit the ground running and prep for the job market all over again. So they were very supportive. I had some good IR mentors there, people who were able to talk to me about my work. And, this was really the first time out of my graduate institution, right, out of my department. So getting a different set of eyes, I think, on my work was immensely important and really valuable. I also interviewed while I was there for a tenure track position that was opening up. So I think the listing went up in like November or something like that. So I would say, depending on the situation, being there can also, it's hard to say across the board if it's a net advantage or not. You kind of get to see how the sausage is made, and you might become mired in departmental politics, which, being there, can complicate things in a way that you don't really have to deal with if you're from the applying from the outside. But I mean, overall, I think that I had a good experience. It was supposed to be a 2-year postdoc, and I ended up getting a job towards the end of my first year there. And I would also, just in general, say that I think self-care, right? There might be a temptation to, it's always a tough balance, right, between working hard, and I think grad students and academics are really prone to just kind of drive themselves into the ground. But I think, especially as a postdoc, I think, self-care and kind of making time for, exercise and other stuff too is something that I think is important for all positions, right? Grad school, postdoc, junior faculty especially. But I think there's something about, being out of your home institution, but not quite there with that, that tenure track job yet, if that's your ultimate aim, that can be particularly stressful. And, I think there might be the temptation individually to sort of, wring every last drop of blood out of that stone to sort of, push yourself. And I think knowing how to strike that balance, again, is really important. But overall, I think being there, I think it was immensely productive for me personally. And I think, professionally, it was, I think, also really advantageous to get to meet some new people.
So I just want to add to that there that it's a really important point, this idea of having a whole new set of eyes and ideas that can be offered toward your work. That is, because, I mean, let's be real, even within our own departments, we have certain cliques within them, the people that we hang out with, we're similar in some way, and when we share our work with them, we're oftentimes of a similar mind. We can get good constructive feedback, but sometimes they're not removed enough from us, or they like us too much to offer, you know, the really hardcore critique that we might need on a specific conceptualization or whatever it is. And so I think this idea of being in a different academic environment could be actually refreshing for you as a scholar. I think I can speak on behalf of my own at the Human Rights Center at the University of Dayton. It might actually even push you in directions that you hadn't realized you wanted to go. So if you have a postdoc within a policy-oriented center, for instance, then it might actually make you start looking at how can you make your work be legible to the general public, which we're not oftentimes very well versed in doing when we first come out of grad school, right? How can we make our ability to converse with others face-to-face? I found, for instance, that I did not engage with policy writing or work as a UConn political science graduate, but when I got my postdoc at the University of Dayton, I was provided opportunities to use my expertise in regional intergovernmental organizations in the Latin American region. And this introduced me to a whole sphere of what I can do with my research that I hadn't really contemplated as a grad student. So I think if you are open to seeing things that you hadn't envisioned originally, and you're at centers that already link in some way to your research agenda or what you want to do in terms of your own heart work is what I call it, they can be immensely powerful experiences for you. But I draw back again to this idea of, I mean, we keep using this term that they're low cost, low risk, in a sense, a postdoc for a department or a center, but you are thrown into the fire. You have to, and this is an important point that was made by, I can't remember whether it was Michael or Evan earlier, that I think it was Evan, you have to show that you've accomplished something within that 1 year period or that 2 year period. Otherwise, if you weren't able to do that during your postdoc year, truthfully, when you've got this whole teaching load, you might be teaching 6 classes a year. How are you going to be able to manage something then, right? So I think it's important, but then this ties back into what Michael was saying. You've also got to balance it with your own sanity, with your own life, right? So this notion of self-care, it's all a balancing act, and I'm not sure. I think if anything comes out of this conversation for me is that there's not necessarily an answer, a one-size-fits-all answer for any of these questions that have been brought up today, right? You have to, as an individual, be flexible. You really do. You got to not only be able to roll with the punches, but you have to accept that things are not going to go your way. No matter how much effort you put into a situation or an application, things aren't going to go your way because there's just too many other personalities, institutional factors, whatever, that come into play. So to get back to Efe's question a few minutes back, what not to expect from a postdoc, do not expect a job from a postdoc. Don't expect that you put in all this effort and you do well and then a job will come up. You will probably end up on the market again. You may end up in another postdoctoral position. You may end up adjuncting. But you have to be flexible enough and confident enough in your own person. I don't want to get too wishy-washy here. To go with, go with the tide. That there are just some things you have to release that you have no control over. And at the end of the day, you did your best. You got to be open to other options.
Yeah, I think likewise, actually. I mean, from my experience and from many other friends' experience, what I see is postdoc, as I said, and I'm constantly repeating this, but this is the most important thing if you ask me. Postdoc is just a temporary position. Yes, it adds up to your CV, but it doesn't dramatically changes the odds for you, I mean, being on the job market and getting a job. There are many reasons for this, I guess. And I mean, one technical reason might be that it's most of the time it's only a 1-year position, and as we just said, I mean, most of the time you should start writing your cover letters, research statements, everything on August, on September. And I mean, imagine you get a postdoc position and you are moving on July or August, and when you're gonna go there and settle, when you're gonna meet with new people, I mean, when you're gonna start working with your new supervisor, advisor, let's say, and so that the odds will change in favor of you dramatically. So the only thing changing when you get the postdoc, if it's only 1-year postdoc, you probably you gain some time, right? You earn some more time, 1 more year to be on the job market. And second, 1 line of CV, if it's let's say quote unquote, I mean, if it's a fancy postdoc that everyone knows institutionally, I mean, established institutionally, I mean, it may somehow increase the chances, of course, but it will not dramatically change the chances. So I definitely agree with Kristy. I mean, do not expect a job, a great job after a postdoc. And I mean, of course, you can add more on this, but I will also put my question for your taste. So we all know that, I mean, when you get a postdoc, you would like to take advantage of this new situation as well. And the new situation is, if you are going to, let's say, Harvard Belfer Center or Stanford SciSec or other places, maybe you would like to get a reference letter from someone who is working at these institutions, because you think that it might increase your chances, and they already liked your work. So why not to ask references? And people, I mean, the positions you are applying may also expect you to submit some references from there. But as we just said, I mean, it's beginning of September. I mean, how come those people can write you a reference? Should I ask you, or whether you did actually, and what were the responses to you? You can also answer this question with other comments. It will be great.
Can I follow up quickly, actually, on the last couple of points by Evan and Kristy? I think they brought up some good kind of ideas or thoughts. One, I wish I had considered non-academic options more seriously earlier on. I think for my own sanity, that would have been wonderful. So I think that is absolutely important. And to Evan's point, right, about you need to show something, for your time in this position. This ties into your point, Efe, right? This does not, you're absolutely right. This does not guarantee you a job. So having, again, been on the other side of this, there are postdocs who we have interviewed who, have not made the best impression for a variety of reasons. And so, if you are working on new projects, right, you need to sort of know what you're doing, for lack of a better term, right? And getting to the previous point about sort of being able to explain what it is that you're working on, to people who maybe don't do that sort of work, right? This sounds like kind of obvious stuff, but you need to sort of demonstrate competence still, right? And it's not unthinkable. And if you are still a grad student and don't have a postdoc, I mean, it is not uncommon for who is still a grad student but makes a very good impression and has demonstrated competence with their work to beat out, I mean, even maybe junior faculty who are applying for the same job, right? So if you have a grad student, a postdoc, and a junior faculty member all applying for the same job, again, having the postdoc sends a signal. You have your degree, you can complete a project, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes into the mix, especially when you start doing on-campus interviews. So I think that these are two really important points, that it's good to get a postdoc. If you aren't able to get one and your goal is to get an assistant professor position, don't be disheartened. I think, like Efe said, it's another line on your CV. It's good, it's progress, but don't feel dispirited, like, you now cannot compete against these individuals who do have that line, because there are a lot of other things that go into it.
Any other comments?
Well, it goes back to your, sorry, Evan, do you want to go? Going back to your original question about letters of reference, when you start the postdoc, how quickly can you ask for those letters? So I can speak about a few experiences, the ones I've had, and also some of my colleagues who I have happened to be present when they asked for a letter. One of our supervisors said, you know, I barely know you right now. It's impossible for me to write a letter on your behalf. Other people, depending on the level of interaction and how often we meet with the supervisor or the advisor, would be willing to offer letters. And so there are all sorts of opportunities that I actually meant to mention or bring up earlier. I think Evan was mentioning something about, and Michael, about getting fresh eyes on your work. There are all these informal or more or less formal groups, working groups, where people present their work, and or reading groups, and through those, especially if they're led by a more senior faculty member, those can be a great way, first of all, to get great comments on our work, but also to allow that mentor to get to know us better, and for us to know them, and establish a mentorship type kind of relationship. So I think asking for a letter as soon as one starts a postdoc would be, I would say in general, more challenging than asking a well-established supervisor. But with time, maybe by the beginning of the spring term, it would be something doable and feasible. I wonder what everybody else thinks about this and what your experiences were.
So Eliza, I'd agree with you that at postdocs, they often do have these subgroups that are much more effective for getting to know people. And so I did the same thing, where I think I listed the head of one of the workshops I did as a reference on my CV, but not the main people at the Belton Center, because I had much fewer interactions with them. But I'll also say that if you're thinking about who to ask for a CV, it's probably not even in your interest to ask someone who doesn't know you very well for a letter of reference. Even if they'll say yes, that's really shouldn't be your goal, is just getting any letter. But I remember someone once told me, who was on a search committee, that there's a pretty high correlation between the strength of a letter of recommendation and how long it is. And it's not always a perfect correlation, but the longer it is, the more detailed, the more personal it seems, the more you get to know a candidate from that letter of recommendation. And if you only know someone for 1 month, well, what are they going to say about you? That you're a nice person, that you look good on paper, nothing that'll add to that picture of who you are. So, I mean, typically I stuck with my dissertation advisors, even an undergraduate advisor who knew me much better. But I absolutely avoided intentionally asking people who were at my postdocs who I didn't know very well, even though they were really senior people who would look great, just because I felt that the strength of the letter mattered more than who necessarily it came from. That's not to say that people who I asked were nobodies who nobody had heard of, and they were obviously well-known, established political scientists of their own right. But I think the quality matters a lot more than just the name on the letterhead.
I would agree, and I would also add, not only do they not know you very well, but you don't necessarily know them, and you can sort of learn through reputation, right, that some people write better letters than others. Excuse me. So I would agree that I don't know, as though it's to echo Evan, that it's not really in your interest necessarily, and Elisa's point about that can be really challenging, right? Because you don't really know each other, and there may be risks, right, in asking for a letter from somebody that you don't really know, and you don't know what kind of letter. Beyond the fact that you don't know each other that well, you don't really know what sort of letter they are.
One final question about this, then it's time to wrap it up with final comments. I would like to ask this question because this is one of the questions I hear very frequently. So, I mean, many people apply for postdoc positions, and especially if they get these positions not from these institutions, but like more like, I mean, departments, the universities themselves, they have this expectations of, I mean, turning into this temporary position into permanent position. Like, I mean, going to somewhere, some university as a postdoc and stay there as an assistant professor. Though, of course, you still need to go through all these steps. But in the minds of many people, it's like once you are there as a postdoc, if they like you and your work, you can find a way, and they would be open to you, open to hire you. From your experiences and from what you heard from the friends and colleagues, is this the case? Is it very common in political science or very uncommon in political science? What would you say?
So I'll jump in here. So I mentioned at the very beginning that I had applied for an assistant professor position at the University of Dayton, and it was their current postdoc who ended up getting the assistant professor position. And so that's an example there that a postdoc could morph into you actually getting a tenure track line with the department. I feel, and I have no evidence to back this up, I think it's very rare.
I wouldn't, yeah, I would probably agree and say I would not rely on it. Efe, I think you made this point earlier, right? This is kind of a layover, right? This is, you know, maybe 1 or 2 years that you have to work towards, again, if that's your goal, right, work towards an assistant professorship, or you're really emphasizing, right, considering non-academic opportunities, even if that's not your first preference, right? I think just given that things don't go your way, I think it's an important consideration. I would agree. I don't think it's necessarily all that common. I was in a situation where they were hiring for an assistant professor position the year that I was there. And like I said, that can come with its own complications. You know, being at the place that is hiring, and you know, while they're going through the job search, can be sort of a strange experience. I got the offer. I was lucky enough to get a second offer from Kansas State, and ultimately chose to come here. But I think that's probably not, not necessarily all that common in having the inside track, right? I think there's this perception that you might have the inside track because you're there. I also think that we maybe have an inflated sense of how true that is.
And just to add to that, I think we talked earlier about the utility of networking for getting jobs and getting postdocs. And I find that these kind of things that we're talking about now are really related back to that having a postdoc can form good connections, help you network people at a university, and definitely if they have a job opening, it might get you a look where you might not have otherwise gotten one, or you might get the benefit of the doubt, and it might help you on the margins. But to me, it's not something that'll make or break that decision. It certainly can't hurt, but it's going to be absolutely on the margins, just like as I think the role of networking is, kind of whether it's for a postdoc, for a job, or for any other opportunity.
If I can jump in here and just briefly say that I have heard of this happening, but I've never experienced it myself. That's number one. And number two, one of the points I wanted to make earlier is that there might be some differences between the European way of doing postdocs and jobs afterwards, and the American way. So in Europe, at Cambridge, Oxford, you have longer postdocs, the junior research fellowships. Those are 3 years, and they don't necessarily, I mean, I've rarely heard of somebody staying on as a professor, but I think in Europe and in some places that's actually more likely than in the US. And one point that I wanted to make earlier, it's slightly off topic when it comes down to this idea of transitioning from the postdoc to assistant professorship, but I think it's very relevant. European letters of reference are extremely different from American letters of reference in terms of length and in terms of the language used. So if somebody wants to apply for an American postdoc and is coming from Europe, you have to make sure that they're going to get somebody who understands the difference and the need to really to say that they're the second coming of Christ, because in a way, that's not how things are done in Europe. and that can hurt the candidate. I would think.
Okay, so these were all, I guess, great suggestions. It was a great chat as well. So let's wrap it up with final comments. Let me begin my comments so that the floors can be yours. As I said, here's what I think about these postdoctoral opportunities. I mean, these are really important to. I mean, if you can find such an opportunity, it's really important to improve your research agenda and improve yourself. I personally highly benefited from my postdoc year. I mean, eventually, this is a topic that we didn't mention, but I mean, of course, sometimes you get a postdoc position and a tenure track position, and a very common another thing in the United States is you can ask your department to defer the offer for 1 year. Actually, this is something we didn't have time to discuss, but I mean, it was my case, and in that 1 year period, I feel that I benefited from that time. I mean, increasing the number of works I have and other things. In that sense, it's very useful. But if you think postdoc position as a transition to go to a, I mean, better place than you could go previous, like, I mean, here is your score with the postdoc, additional 2 points, and now it's your new score, so you can end up in a way better place. I guess this is not the case, and this is what we all somehow confirm from our experiences or what we heard. This is why we should think that this is a temporary position. It's not permanent in many cases. It's a good opportunity, but not the end of the road. Still, I mean, if you're gonna stay in academia, still there are many other factors, institutional factors, personal characteristic factors that you need to take into account. And final words, this is another thing. Actually, we are always focusing on staying on academia, and this is why we question whether postdocs would be beneficial or not to increase the odds in your favor. But there's another option, non-academic jobs, as Michael also I mentioned. Michael is a tenured associate professor at Kansas State, and I'm glad that he mentioned that for the sake of mind, he would have preferred considering non-academic options as well. So this is something that should be taken into account, I guess. Floor is yours with final comments.
So I'll go next. Efe, thank you for putting this together for us. Hopefully somebody somewhere will find something useful out of this that will help them during their postdoc application processes this year and the upcoming years. I just think, you know, you take whatever opportunity feels right for you, and your opportunity isn't going to be there at all unless you apply. It's like the lottery. You can't win if you don't buy the ticket. We've heard that, right? So apply for these positions if they interest you, just as you would any other assistant professor position. But we keep talking about how this is something that buys time. You can look at this positively or negatively, this biding of time. This biding of time could be prolonging agony, right? You could end up being a hamster spinning your wheels, going from one postdoc to another, to one adjunct position to a VAP, so on and so forth. And that's a personal decision that you oftentimes have to make with your significant other, your children. Sometimes it's not just you, right, where we consider these kind of things. So it could be prolonging agony, or it could be letting you breathe for a moment and figure out if this is something you still remain passionate about and that you are in it for the long haul, right? So it depends on your frame of mind, this biding time. But that is what the postdoc period is. It's biding time, but it's also giving you additional experiences, new networks, colleagues who can give you input on your research. Like, there are multiple opportunities that come from this one opportunity. It's a stepping stone, right? It's not an end in and of itself, and it's not something you do to get you to somewhere else, because you have no idea where you're going.
All right, I'll go next, I guess. So my final two comments, not to repeat what other people have said. I think So before I begin, Efe, this is a great idea, and I wish this were around when I was looking for postdocs and applying. I think it would have been really helpful. But to add, I would say first, don't take rejections personally. Everyone up here, I'm sure, has gotten rejected from many more postdocs than they apply to, even though some of us have great postdoc experiences and now have great jobs. Jobs and postdocs will reject you, and it doesn't mean you're not a good scholar, and you just gotta keep trucking and keep working. And the second thing is you can't shoehorn lots of these opportunities. And I really figured this out when I finally got a job at UConn last year, that this relates back to a comment I made earlier, but people can see through when you try to very quickly pitch your research as something it's not. And when you find the right job or opportunity, it will fit. And you'll notice that immediately. But so don't take it personally when you try to apply for something that doesn't really make sense for your research agenda, because people can see through that. And you just have to keep looking for those opportunities that do fit you really well. And eventually they'll come along.
Can I jump in here? Hello?
Yes.
Almost set.
Sorry. I think I got disconnected for a while. So I also wanted to thank you, Efe, and thank you to all the other participants for sharing their experiences and for being so, this is a form of support. Support at this point in our careers is extremely important. We need all the community we can get, all the advice and all the people being open and sharing their experiences as much as we can. So thank you all for doing that. For me, the postdocs I've had were fantastic opportunities for growth, professionally and personally, for expanding my research agenda and for becoming part of various networks that I have heard about, but I never kind of quite imagined being part of them. So that was really wonderful. And it was a time where I could decide which way I wanted to go. And those decisions were not easy, but with the right kind of, right kind of help and support, I think those can be actually enjoyable in the end. So I do recommend that people who want to get a taste of postgraduate life and also sort of think about whether they where they want to go, a postdoc would give them a good opportunity to explore. It's a great time for trying different things and ultimately hopefully landing a good job. I do think they are a force multiplier. I do think that postdocs, a lot of good things can come out of them. So good luck to all those people who are currently looking. Fingers are crossed for you.
So I agree. I think this is a really fantastic opportunity, and it's been interesting to hear other people's stories and kind of experiences with postdocs. My impression is that these sorts of positions, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, are becoming increasingly normal. So I think it's also important to keep that in mind, that this is not like somehow less than a junior faculty position. And I think, as everybody has discussed, this is actually a really fantastic opportunity, or can be, right? It's sort of the first time that you're out of your home institution. You're getting to know new people. You're getting to expand networks, get new eyes on your work and maybe teaching abilities. And I think that you should absolutely embrace the opportunity to sort of take in all of this new knowledge and meet new people and strengthen your portfolio and your work. It can also be a very sort of strange and insecure time, because it is the first time that you are out from your home institution, and they might have the ability to fund grad students who are doing well for 2 or 3 years on the market, right? But there's this, I think, vulnerability when you're out there for the first time as a postdoc. You don't have that tenure clock sort of backing you up, and you don't have that home institution. So I do think it can be really nerve-wracking. I certainly paced my apartment fretting about my future, several times. because it doesn't change the fact that the job market is still a very stressful experience. And on that note, as Kristy brought up earlier, I again would encourage people to start expanding your horizons, even if this is not your first preference, right? To look at non-academic opportunities. And ultimately, I think the structure of the postdoc itself, hitting on a point that Evan made earlier, is important. I didn't have teaching responsibilities, so I was able to focus on research, and that was good, but there was a trade-off. When I got my tenure track job, I then had to devote that much more time to prepping new courses that I was expected to teach. And so I think, as Evan mentioned earlier, right, it's not necessarily a bad thing if you're getting some of that work out of the way. So I think that there are ways to view this, right? I think you just need to look for the opportunities that are present in whatever opportunity it is that you happen to get, right? Whatever postdoc you get. There are going to be strengths and weaknesses to every position. And lastly, I think emphasizing this point, right, that you need to put in the work if it's a postdoc attached to another project that somebody's working on. It's all well and good, right, if you come into a job talk with that sort of new experience and new work under your belt, but you have to show something for it, right? You have to be able to show that you know what they're doing, and you can't sort of kind of phone it in and expect to get a job. It is not a guaranteed job, the institution that you're at or elsewhere, but it helps. And I think that, as others have suggested, it's kind of what you make of it. And I think it can be a really good opportunity.
So thank you very much, everyone, for participating and sharing your experiences. And for those who just followed us live, thank you very much for your questions. And I hope it was beneficial for you, and in terms of, showing you the lead and, sharing our experiences. And also, I strongly encourage you, and we all strongly encourage you to share this. Actually, you can basically share the YouTube link. The link will be there forever, I guess. If you have friends, colleagues who are planning to apply for postdocs, and you can also, if you have any additional questions, at least you can you can mail your questions to me. So thank you very much. We will stop broadcasting right now live. Have a nice day.